For all our delight in the impermanent, the entrancing flicker of electronics, we also long for the unalterable. So people turn to the realms of fantasy for stability, ancient truths, immutable simplicities. And the mills of capitalism provide them. Supply meets demand. Fantasy becomes a commodity, an industry. Commodified fantasy takes no risks, it invents nothing, but imitates and trivializes. What the commodifiers of fantasy count on and exploit is the insuperable imagination of the reader, child or adult, which gives even these dead things life, of a sort, for a while. I've lost most of my faith in the film industry at this point, and I know I'm not alone in that. The film industry releases movie after movie, franchise after franchise, and they continue to frustrate fans and creatives alike. Or they fail to make bank, or both. One significant past success and the company milks it for all it's worth, or they buy every existing mega franchise they can, and again, milk it for all it's worth. Or, worse yet, they revive or remake an existing franchise because money. The film industry has always done this, but in recent years it has completely taken over to the point where it feels like every single movie and show getting released is an attempt at furthering an existing franchise. The big issue this creates is that the new pieces of media tend to suck. Star Wars is one of the worst cases of this, with so many new shows, comics, books, and whatever else constantly getting churned out. It's honestly no wonder the quality has declined. The few new IPs that either get created or adapted get little to no advertising or merch, and they have a tendency to flop through no fault of their own and never get a chance to shine. I honestly don't know which fate is worse, dying before being given a chance or succeeding and getting drained of creativity. But there is one fate that's definitely worse than either of those. A new movie or show comes out that divides the fan base. Thus, the internet lights on fire, and all the discussion becomes about the fandom being toxic, and possibly insert your preferred discriminatory word here. Last year, I made a video about one of those fan wars, specifically regarding the Star Wars fandom, and how it connected to the larger culture war, which I expanded on in another video I made a few months ago. But this video isn't about that. This time, I'm expanding on a topic I wanted to include in my original Star Wars video, and that's, what respect do we really owe fan bases in this day and age? What respect do we really owe creatives in this day and age? I'm sure you've all got your own answers to this question, but I wanted to explore it a bit more, because even with those two other videos totaling around 2 hours, I still did not talk about all the fandom divisions I've bore witness to. Some of them are for IPs I myself am not a fan of, but thanks to my following various YouTubers who are fans, I've become aware of more of these fan wars than I ever expected, and in all of this, I've noticed a few recurring patterns, and I'd like to talk about those today. But in order to explain drama in the fandom, we need to understand the other side of the equation, that being the industry and all its problems. In the past couple of decades, we've seen every single mainstream franchise with any level of success get revived, rebooted, and spun off of in every which way. With rare exceptions like Back to the Future, for now at least, almost every mainstream franchise has been milked to death. Jurassic Park, Alien, Terminator, Lord of the Rings, thanks Hobbit movies. Even some much older films you probably didn't know became franchises with sequels and reboots like Home Alone and Die Hard. Some have justified sequels better than others, and while the movies always vary in quality, one thing remains certain. Make enough movies and eventually they will suck, possibly harming the narrative of the original film as well. This kind of milking is not new. Unnecessarily continuing films into massive franchises to the detriment of the narrative has been done for decades. While this has always been the case, it has gotten much worse in recent memory. Franchises are all the industry can put out nowadays. So where does that leave newer creatives or authors who want their work adapted to the screen? Opportunities for such a creator to tell their stories are fewer than they used to be. Corporations are just relying more and more on existing IP, and as such, artists have to latch onto an existing franchise to make anything at all. So what do you do when you're only allowed to tell someone else's story but you want to tell your own? You change that someone else's story to fit your vision. This might be the reason so many unfaithful adaptations get made. Brandon Sanderson has talked about an adaptation of one of his stories, The Emperor's Soul, getting conceptualized in a screenplay. The Emperor's Soul, if you're not aware, is a very small-scale story, the vast majority of which takes place in a single room. In the screenplay he was later handed was a globe-trotting, monster-fighting fantasy adventure set, in the author's words, in a world that was completely unrelated to mine. Sanderson theorizes that because of how Hollywood works, basing your new story off an existing idea, or at least pretending you are, is the only way to get it greenlit, unless you're already a huge name in the industry. But then that screws over the author and fanbase of that original work. And even if you get writers, a director, and executives to agree to a faithful adaptation, there's a chance enough things will go wrong and the project will be cancelled in development hell. My favorite example of this is Bone. If you're not aware, Jeff Smith's fantasy epic is considered one of the greatest graphic novels ever to be made in North America. There was a time during my childhood when these books were everywhere, and people still talk about them today. Yet, he's failed to get it adapted 3 separate times. Nickelodeon, Warner Bros., and most recently Netflix all talked to him about it, but all of them canceled it or turned it down. But even then, even if you get your idea or adaptation greenlit, even if you have enough creative control to make sure it matches your vision, even if no other outside interference occurs, even if it comes out exactly the way you want it, there's a chance you won't be able to finish it. In the past few years, I've noticed, especially when it comes to animated movies and shows, corporations not doing much in the way of advertising for some new IP or new adaptation, and not creating any merch for it. And then it flops and gets cancelled after 1 movie, or sometimes 2 to 3 seasons of a TV show at best. My favorite example of this, at least in the past year, is The Wheel of Time. Amazon pushed the first season with a lot of advertising, trying to make the next Game of Thrones, but this declined over the course of the series until season 3, which got significantly less promotion, and after it aired, was rated 97% fresh and was praised up and down by fans for its faithful adaptation of the source material, including myself. It got cancelled. It reportedly had similar numbers to Rings of Power, while costing a lot less, by the way. I've even seen fans point out how this model of television would have prematurely killed series before they hit their stride. Even series we now consider to be industry juggernauts like Star Trek: The Next Generation. And that's only one example from one company. In the past, I thought Disney's treatment of The Owl House was due to its LGBTQ content. But I'm not so sure after looking into it. Other Disney cartoons like The Ghost and Molly McGee and Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur have gotten this sort of treatment as well. No official merch, very little promotion, and both of them were cancelled after 2 seasons. And they didn't even get 3 special episodes to close the story out, like The Owl House. And The Owl House probably only got those because it gained massive popularity through word of mouth, despite the lack of advertising. And of course, this applies to the movie industry as well, especially when it comes to animation. You all have probably heard of Elio flopping earlier this year for similar reasons as Elemental initially flopped 2 years ago. Little marketing, and what we did get was pretty bad, all while Disney put out tons of marketing for the Lilo and Stitch remake. Elemental may have recovered from its initial failure, but that doesn't seem to have impressed the executives, and not every good animated movie can do that. Transformers 1 certainly wasn't able to do it. That movie had terrible marketing, but it's genuinely good. It did so many things that just worked for the Transformers franchise, and it could have led to a series of great movies. But that idea never got off the ground. You could attribute some of this to the state of the franchise Michael Bay left it in, but not all of it. And don't even get me started about Warner Bros. And how they treated The Day the Earth Blew Up, and how they tried to lock up Coyote vs. Acme so no one would ever be able to see it. But my favorite example is Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken from DreamWorks. I've hinted at it before, but I've got a real soft spot for this movie. I love the stylized, squishy, noodly animation, the breathtaking underwater scenes, and I love its endearing title character. Ruby is one of my all-time favorite DreamWorks characters. The only reason she isn't my absolute favorite is because of the impact Hiccup and Toothless had on me when I was growing up. Ruby is anxious, shy, overthinks everything, but she's compassionate and determined when she needs to be. That moment during the film when she gets into the water, knowing what's going to happen to her, genuinely touched me as a trans person in a way almost no other scene in any other piece of media has. But thanks to its terrible marketing that gave away the entire plot of the movie and focused too much on its mishandled message about prejudice that was cringe and had very little to do with the actual story, the movie flopped hard. Though it did have enough positive press for a brief success on Netflix, I'm not holding my breath for anything else. Yes, the movie told a complete story, but much like Rise of the Guardians, there is so much more you could do with this world and characters. I've seen people rag on this movie for it mishandling its ideas about prejudice, but Ruby never falls into that mindset. In fact, she really goes against it.
Now, what about the mermaid? Everyone likes fried fish.
No. Away, Rage.
Oh, teenagers. Away, Rage.
But even as I defend the movie, I admit it really should have done more to explore this particular topic, considering how important it is to the story. Which could be done in a sequel, or dare I say it, a Netflix series, but again, I'm not holding my breath. Because that's the industry we have these days. No risk-taking, nothing new. Even when something new does come along, it probably dies very quickly. This is a huge issue I admittedly don't have the answer to. For now, the best I can come up with is be careful what you invest your time and your hard-earned cash in. Personally, I'd advise investing more in media that's outside the mainstream, and/or is handled by a single creative. This is actually a major reason why I started a book/comic channel to talk about my favorite novels, comics, manga, and their adaptations, including anime, because they are all predominantly single stories told from a single creator's vision. There's also indie animation, amongst other things. Most of you probably know about Glitch Productions, Vivzy Pop, and Pretty Please I Don't Want to Be a Magical Girl, though if you haven't heard about that last one, I highly recommend it. I'd also like to shout out a couple of lesser-known projects, Pieces of Powder and Sirenetta Part-Time Mermaid. Though with the latter, not all of it is good, and you really should start with a family dinner short film. But even as I bash the mainstream media, I admit it does serve a purpose. Big-name movies and shows can bring everyone together. They're like major cultural shifts that shake up the whole industry and probably introduce a lot of people to something they've never seen before. But again, be careful what you invest in. And I'd seriously advise against following a story in any medium past its natural endpoint. That movie trilogy that had a complete story told in a trilogy that hasn't gotten a new entry in the better part of a decade getting a fourth movie is probably a bad sign. That TV show that wrapped up all of its plot threads and character arcs in 1, 2, or 3 seasons continuing may not be better for it. So, coming back to the industry today, newsflash, business-minded people don't understand or care about creativity, and they are terribly short-sighted. It's gotten worse as time has gone on and the industry has become more capitalistic, and inevitably, in their careless attitude towards the franchises they handle, someone is going to make a mistake. Because the story continued past its natural endpoint and recycled the same plot over and over again, or people forget what the original story really was and it becomes something unrecognizable. Or worst of all, someone who doesn't care about the existing story or the fans has their own vision they want to bring to life, and they get complete control of it. Remember what I said about Brandon Sanderson in the Emperor's Soul screenplay? I would try to ask the question of what would happen if the globetrotting unfaithful adaptation had succeeded, if it weren't for the fact that I don't have to imagine it. Because I've seen this exact sort of thing happen with so many IPs from the mainstream to the niche. It's not pretty, and that's to say nothing of the effect it can have on the fans. Fandoms have become more and more of a popular talking point, even in the mainstream media in the past decade or so, and not for good reasons. Fanbases used to be a community you could be a part of if you wanted to connect with other fans of a particular IP. And while fanbases getting angry wasn't unheard of before the 2010s, it's gotten much more prevalent since then. There have been many reasons for this, the biggest one being studios constantly pumping out new pieces of media. Usually this results in fanbases either liking the new thing, or they kind of like it but don't think it needed to exist, or some fans like it but other fans viscerally dislike it. This leads to a little phenomenon I like to call fandom division. which is easily the worst kind of fandom drama. Over the past decade or so, I've seen fan bases become toxic for a number of reasons, be it obsessive power fantasy, thinking one story is superior to all others because of subversion or snobbery, shipping disagreements, etc. But when it comes to fans being fiercely divided, I've noticed a recurring pattern. If people near universally hate something, the drama eventually dies down as they run out of things to say about it. But if there is a substantial number of people on both sides, love and hate, they can be constantly putting out arguments and responding to each other, creating a feedback loop. Thus, drama can last much longer, years on end, until something else comes along to take their attention. Star Wars is easily the most infamous case of this, and undeniably the absolute worst, as I still see people ranting about The Last Jedi, even though it's been almost a decade. I've already talked about the Star Wars fan drama enough on this channel, so I'll be brief here. George Lucas handed Disney and Kathleen Kennedy an outline for the sequel trilogy when he sold the rights, but Disney discarded it and decided to make their own. The Force Awakens came out directed by J.J. Abrams, and it felt like a retreading of A New Hope. But then The Last Jedi came out 2 years later, directed by Rian Johnson, who, according to Mark Hamill, went in with the attitude of not caring about what the fans wanted and only thinking about what he was making. This resulted in The Last Jedi taking a hard left turn into another dimension from where J.J. Abrams and what George Lucas were trying to do. And that lit an internet firestorm hotter than the lava of Mustafar. Eventually, some YouTube grifters found statements from Kathleen Kennedy about promoting strong women in Star Wars, along with a statement where she forgot about the EU, and a statement from Marcia Lucas, editor of the original trilogy, who said that while she likes Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams, quote-unquote, they don't get it, specifically highlighting Han Solo dying amongst other things. The grifters took Kathleen's statements about promoting strong women in Star Wars and her incompetence to mean she was injecting a feminist agenda into Star Wars, and she didn't care that she was ruining the story and beloved male characters to do so. Then, other creatives said things that made it super easy to complain about and cry woke agenda, like Brie Larson saying that she saw playing Captain Marvel as her form of activism, or Leslie Headland saying she was going to make The Acolyte about identity politics. And the grifters were given low-hanging fruit to continue the grift and grow dramatically, causing the fan rage to continue and spread to other franchises like Doctor Who, Masters of the Universe, and Lord of the Rings. There's more to it than that, see these videos for details. I am not recapping it all here. This is easily the biggest case of fandom division and the one I have the most personal investment in, but there are others I didn't talk about in my previous 2 drama retrospectives because I felt they weren't part of the same issue, but they are part of the discussion for this video. The first one, of course, being DC, specifically the Snyderverse and everything else. Now, DC has been around a while, and it has tons and tons of fans across many mediums, with comparable cultural impact even to Star Wars, but mainstream films tend to have an impact greater than most other forms of media by orders of magnitude. The only exceptions being extremely popular TV shows like Game of Thrones or The Walking Dead. Comics, cartoons, books, and even direct-to-video animated movies are all niche in comparison to big theatrical releases. Hence, despite existing for much less time than the rest of DC media, with way fewer entries, Snyder fans are numerous enough to be a significant part of the conversation, even 4 years after the Snyder Cut. The point of division here being how Zack Snyder portrayed key characters like Superman and Batman, compared to how they are portrayed in most other appearances, including more recent appearances. Batman is easy to explain. He doesn't kill, and that includes doing everything he can to prevent death by inaction, even if that means not killing the Joker. But the best example, much like Luke Skywalker, is Superman. Superman in most other portrayals does everything he can to prevent destruction and death because he is usually the only one with the power to do it. He'll go out of his way to save a cat from a tree, or take the hit of a kaiju attack to save one person, all while instilling a sense of hope in people. In Man of Steel, he's either emotionless or angry, and he doesn't seem to care if buildings fall on other people. But it's dark and edgy, so some people, presumably teenagers and/or people who had never had too much exposure to other Superman stories, latched onto it, seeing it as their thing, and they get angry when they see the DCEU moving in a different direction, under James Gunn. even if said different direction is returning to what Superman and other heroes originally stood for. I'm surprised, but not that surprised by how toxic the Snyder fandom has been. Despite James Gunn and Zack Snyder respecting each other, they see James Gunn's Superman movie as a personal attack on the story that they love, and have campaigned every bit as hard as your average Last Jedi hater to take down the new Superman film. But it didn't work, obviously, and they're salty about it to the point of absolute denial. Thankfully, we have a mainstream Superman adaptation that's made by someone who loves the character in his original form and wanted to do it justice. To, from what I understand, great success. I have a few more divided fan bases I'd like to discuss, but these next two are a bit different, in that they are book series that both got big budget adaptations, rather than a new mainstream entry. The Wheel of Time and Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Now, Percy Jackson fans were already a bit insufferable before the show came out, and I say that as a Percy Jackson content creator who considers the greater connected universe, known as the Riordanverse by fans, as their favorite book series. I have my reasons as to why I no longer go to r/Camp Half-Blood, even before the show came out. The Wheel of Time fandom, on the other hand, was easily the best fandom I had ever interacted with prior to the release of the Amazon Prime show. At the time, I suspected that it had to do with the older demographic of the books and the amount of dedication it takes to finish the series. But after a few episodes of each of their respective streaming series adaptations, both fan bases hit the roof. Now, it's bad in the Percy Jackson fanbase, toxic fanbase ranting even over a year after the first season. I've seen even some people make videos about it, and how disappointed they are in the fandom. But all things considered, it isn't as bad as other fandom divisions I've talked about, though that's primarily because the general opinion of the show by the fandom is that it's deeply flawed, but overall still good, partly due to the first season ending on a high note. The Wheel of Time fandom, on the other hand, has not been so lucky. I've defended The Wheel of Time on Prime since before Season 3 turned out to be an absolute masterpiece and one of the best adaptations I've ever seen. And honestly, I don't think the show was ever that bad, but blood and bloody ashes! A few episodes into the first season, and this fanbase became the worst fanbase I've ever seen aside from Star Wars and arguably the Snyder Bros. Many fans absolutely despised the show and very quickly created separate spaces for show haters, flooded the comment section of every single promotional video released by Amazon on YouTube, and even left some angry comments on videos released years ago and have nothing to do with the show. Viciously attacked anyone who dared talk about the show in any capacity, or anyone who dared call them out on their overtly toxic behavior, and what it was doing to the fandom. Defending their actions as just being disappointed, and of course, celebrating when the show got cancelled earlier this year. They even have a separate fandom nickname that caught on better than any of the whole fandom nicknames. If you don't know, the Wheel of Time fandom tried to name itself something like how Star Trek fans are called Trekkies and how Doctor Who fans are called Whovians, but names like Wheelies and Dragonsworn never really caught on, and I never hear about them nowadays. But when show fans started calling the haters book cloaks, it caught on very well. Book cloaks, for those who have not read the Wheel of Time books or seen the show, is a reference to the Children of the Light, also known as the White Cloaks. They are, to be blunt, religious fanatics who kill anyone that goes against their worldview and their beliefs about the Creator, which is anyone with some sort of magic or anyone who disagrees with them too much. The White Cloaks have a tendency to execute such people without a fair trial. I only started seeing the term book cloak catch on recently, and every Wheel of Time fan instantly knows what it means. Yet I only heard terms like Wheelies and Dragonsworn sparingly, even right after they were first created. The nickname for the adaptation haters caught on better than the nickname for the fandom ever did. This is the only time I've seen that happen, and it's a bad sign. Oof. Okay, only one more of these to really look over. My last example is a video game fandom, which is very different in terms of how fans interact with them, but they carry a lot of the same patterns as the other fandoms I've talked about. Paper Mario. I haven't really played any of these games aside from a minute or two at best, and watching my dad play Super for a little while, but I've become all too aware of the division this fandom has seen thanks to YouTubers like Arlo. In recent memory, I have also watched Chukka Conroy's Let's Play of the first game, so I think I understand the appeal. I'll simplify what I can here. For those not in the know, Paper Mario was a series that started all the way back on the N64 in the year 2000. It was known as Mario Story in Japan and was basically a turn-based RPG that was made to feel like a storybook. It was more slowly paced compared to other Mario games and even other Mario RPGs like Mario and Luigi. There were different moves you need to perform against certain enemies, and partners with their own abilities that were useful in certain situations. Speaking of the partners, each of them was a fully developed character with personality, goals, and a whole story arc you play through before they permanently join the team. Speaking of which, the game also did a lot to flesh out the Mushroom Kingdom and its various locales and citizens. Each place you visit is as fleshed out as your average town in a Legend of Zelda game, with a place in the world, characters with personality, societal roles, and even connections to other characters in other parts of the world. It's not Xenoblade levels of depth, but it's charming and enjoyable in its own way. It also got a sequel called Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, which fleshed out the world, characters, and gameplay even more than the first game, but it was on the GameCube, which did not sell all that well, especially compared to the competition. Then Super Paper Mario came out on the Wii, and it was mostly a departure from what the series originally was in terms of gameplay, but it still had a dark and compelling story and characters. Then we get the most infamous game in the series, and one of the most hated video game sequels I've ever seen but haven't played. Paper Mario Sticker Star, which had a terrible story, very little character, a cast of mostly regular toads, and some of the stupidest game design decisions I've ever seen, revolving around collecting disposable items you need to attack, and picking up specific objects that are easy to miss but absolutely required to beat the game, like we're back on the NES. Then Paper Mario Color Splash came out on the Wii a few years later, and it was better than Sticker Star, containing less stupidity in its game design, but it still lacked a compelling story and characters, and it kept the combat system revolving around disposable attacks, and once again, it was widely panned. This was how the drama got on my radar. Then, a few years after that, we got Paper Mario: The Origami King, which was even closer to the first two games in terms of story and character, but tried a radically different style of combat and still didn't have anything resembling the RPG and partner system of the first two. This time there were a decent number of people who liked the new game, so this led to division in the same song and dance we're used to at this point. The old fans criticized the new thing, fans of the new thing, particularly newer fans who haven't gotten as much chance to play the first two games, at least until the Thousand Year Door remake and NSO changed that, which led to internet shouting matches that continued in a feedback loop for years, and would latch on to anyone that even mentioned Paper Mario on social media. Thankfully, things have calmed down in recent memory with the Thousand Year Door remake. So with all that being said, when you line them all up, we tend to notice similar threads they all share despite how different all these fan wars may be. Each of these cases, regardless of medium, had a major new adaptation, a mainstream edition in the case of big franchises, and the new piece of media did not match the original creative vision for the franchise, either intentionally or accidentally, but it had its own creative vision, and just had the existing franchise slapped on over it, so it gained its own fan base. And because there are two conflicting visions in the same franchise, each with its own fanbase, division starts to arise from there. There is a bit of an exception regarding the two adaptations I discussed, but adaptations are fundamentally separate entities from their source material, and the changes made when adapting a story are often necessary, and they're never going to please everyone, so the division was in some ways inevitable, but some of the decisions made still could have been better. Fundamentally, fans are people with investment, usually emotional investment in something. When people are invested in something, no matter what it is, they want to protect their investment. In the case of fan division, seeing people enjoying the new thing or the old thing if you're on the other side is seen as a threat to your investment because more people enjoying the thing you don't like is incentive for the IP holder to make more things like it. So to protect your investment, assuming you don't have the maturity to just let it go, which, let's be real, describes a lot of people on the internet, you Twitter fight anyone who likes the other thing and probably end up hurting the fan space, because respecting other people's opinions or just not caring means death of the franchise you love. And the fallout of this drama can be anything from mass harassing to lots of people getting banned. So, how should we handle this? Well, speaking as a YouTuber and an aspiring storyteller, when I put one of these passion projects together, it's an endeavor. I don't think people on the outside realize the blood, sweat, and tears that go into creating a story, an art piece, or even a YouTube channel. And even what I've done is pretty minuscule compared to what many professionals have done. And as a fan of various IPs, I feel like I appreciate the work of creatives a lot more, attempting some creativity myself. Fan bases are large groups of people with emotional investment in something. Creatives also have emotional investment in what they create. so much so that they bring it into existence when no one else cares. And when you've invested so much of your life into something, you want to protect it, or more accurately, you want it respected. And you wouldn't want it to be put in control of someone who won't respect it and protect it as you made it as a creator, or as you came to love it as a fan. This might sound a bit controversial, and I'll explain this point more in a little bit, but I believe we ought to respect the original vision for the franchise. I know that a ton of you are about to send me a million counter-arguments, but hear me out. Try to put yourself in the creator's position. If you've spent a significant portion of your life on something, you want it to matter. You want people to see it. And someone taking that away from you and using it for their own purpose is going to feel like a betrayal. If you're a fan, assuming you have the maturity to not start internet fights, what do you do if something that was a part of your life, and maybe something you shared with friends or family, becomes something you aren't enjoying the way you used to? You let it go. Sometimes it's a natural end point, but if there is going to be more, if a story is interrupted before it's finished, then it robs you of the ending you would have received. More on this later. Despite that, I will add the caveat that you shouldn't bend knee to all fan desires either. Art must be created with a creative vision. Otherwise, it's going to turn out soulless. And again, knowing what changes to make with adaptations is difficult. Now, if you still don't believe me or think I'm crazy for even suggesting the idea that original creatives and fandoms deserve respect, let's try a little thought experiment. Let's pretend for a moment that you love Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's one of your favorite shows and pieces of media of all time. You love its characters, its themes, and its world. You've rewatched it numerous times throughout your life. Then one day you see the news that there's going to be a new Avatar series, and you are excited and you find out it's about a female main character, which is a change you're okay with. So you follow the news leading up to the release of the show. The show comes out, and it's not what you expected. Before it starts, Aang had a falling out with his friends, and he abandoned them along with all his Avatar duties and his no-kill rule, aspects that basically defined his character in the original show. The Fire Nation restarted the war and is once again nearing victory. The lore has been rewritten, and now spirits are not beings deeply tied to nature with morality that's difficult for humans to grasp. They're either good or evil, and the evil ones need to be fought against. The new female lead is not a new Avatar, but some other person who bonded with a spirit and can bend all four elements. But she didn't need to track down a master of each one and train diligently, or even put in the effort to understand each element and what they individually stand for. Yet she's somehow a master of all four and is able to go toe-to-toe with powerful opponents. She's also pretty emotionless and maybe even a little angry. Existing characters from the previous show are there, but not for very long. In fact, they often feel like they've had their character arcs reset. Oh, and some of them end up dead. Needless to say, you're not just disappointed, you're straight up pissed that the writers would lure you in with the possibility of a new Avatar show only to dash your hopes and make you feel cheated for being invested, and angry with how your favorite characters were treated. So you go to the internet, and you see that the general consensus is that the fans are just being toxic and even misogynistic. Fan complaints tend to be about how the new main character gained power without training for it, as per the established standards for the world. They also cite ruining existing characters, especially Aang, on top of other lore inconsistencies. Naturally, there are people who enjoyed the show responding to all these claims, fighting them at every turn. And people on the outside, including the media, seem to have taken their side. There are countless articles, videos, and posts of people defending the new show, saying the fans are just being toxic, and cite the backlash from fans, including harassment sent to actors as proof. This naturally makes you even more angry, frustrated, furious even, because you haven't done any of that. You just didn't like the new show, for very good reasons. And you aren't the only one. There are some social media channels and sites that agree with you. They are seemingly just as angry as you. They speak to your frustrations, and it's validating. Not only that, they seem to have identified who is responsible for the choices that ruined the show for you. Incoming executives, women who talk about adding diversity to the Avatar franchise, saying that it was too much of a boys' club before. The main executive was also seen wearing a "She is Female" shirt in a group photo. These women also don't seem to understand and or care about the franchise as it had been before, with its themes of balance and connection, and just seem to want to do their own thing. Some deliberately say they are updating it for a modern audience with modern identity politics. So, with a target to direct your anger at, and the media and most other YouTubers still dismissing the fans as misogynistic, you subscribe to the channels that mirror your rage, and you stay loyal and supportive even as they get more radical with their opinions, and start to rail against any mention of diversity. Can you imagine being in a position like that? I can, because I almost was. The only thing that stopped me from falling into that pipeline was the fact that I had been taught from a young age to accept LGBT people and the women in my life. And the fact that I realized Kathleen Kennedy is more likely well-intentioned, but incompetent, as shown by Marsha Lucas's comments, and the fact that she forgot about the EU despite being the one to erase it. Thankfully, that scenario I just described is not the world we live in, at least for the Avatar franchise, yet. The first sequel series we actually got, The Legend of Korra, is still considered a good show by the fandom despite its flaws, and that includes myself as well. I may hate Season 2, but Seasons 3 and 4 were more than worth the time I spent watching. Let's just hope it doesn't happen with the new Avatar series that's coming out soon. By the looks of it, some pretty drastic actions were taken, but we'll just have to wait and see. As a side note, this whole segment was inspired by a similar one from this video by Arlo, addressing the fandom division and toxicity accusations in the Paper Mario fanbase. Bottom line is, if you did that to any popular franchise, made a sequel at the end of a major arc, then gave it the Last Jedi treatment, the fanbase, assuming it was big enough, would look just as toxic as the Star Wars fandom does today. In fact, let's take a look at a few I've talked about in this channel. Picture a world in which the Heroes of Olympus started up with Percy Jackson having disappeared, and he's eventually found, but is now an angry, jaded, selfish hermit who doesn't care about protecting his friends or trying to make things better. Picture a world where My Hero Academia got a sequel in which Deku is found after a villainous takeover of Japan, and he doesn't care about being a hero and saving people anymore. Picture a world in which the next One Piece arc started up with some new pirates searching for Luffy, only to find him isolated on an island without his desire to become king of the pirates, will to protect his friends, or even his voracious appetite. Do you honestly think their fanbases would look any better than the Star Wars fanbase does right now? Better yet, can you honestly say that those stories would be made objectively better by such decisions because they are darker and quote-unquote more realistic? I don't care how much you love The Last Jedi or the Snyder Cut or whatever. Your opinion is your own. All I ask is that you don't try to tell people their opinion is objectively bad or wrong. Though I do feel the need to add a disclaimer here: do not go and harass anyone. Doing that at all will always cause more harm than good. In this day and age, we need to remember that the people who engage with these fan rage spaces are still people, not mindless bots or cartoon caricatures. They have feelings, like humility and mockery, and it can be quite enjoyable, even addictive to make fun of them. But there are reasons I avoid online drama whenever possible. Online drama, when taken too far, has consequences. In my video on why supporting Harry Potter is supporting J.K. Rowling, I told a personal story about two content creators from a different platform who I accidentally got into a years-long flame war that ended up in one of them getting banned. In the video, I brought that up to make a point about the power influencers have, as one of those creators was far more popular than the other. That point I made about emotional investment applies to franchise creators and influencers too. A fan's investment in something can cause them to stick with it despite all the signs that they ought to stop. Sticking with an IP despite the fact that all the new entries have sucked. Sticking with an influencer despite them being a terrible person who is able to hurt other people because of their success and influence. Or desperately clinging to a particular view of a franchise and attacking anyone who disagrees with you because you think your view of it is the correct one. You are entitled to your opinion, and you are entitled to share it with your fellow fans. You just shouldn't try to force your opinion forward as the correct interpretation. On the other side of that issue, don't let others' opinions sway you. If you like The Last Jedi, don't let my dislike of it prevent you from enjoying it. I only ask that you respect me for disagreeing. Don't let anyone tell you your enjoyment or lack thereof is illegitimate or wrong. And most certainly don't let anyone tell you that something you like is objectively bad or lesser because XYZ. In my research for my initial Star Wars video, I came across this article in which the author insists that Star Wars fans don't deserve The Last Jedi. I'll admit I haven't read the whole article, I'm not paying to read the rest of this, but everything I'm able to read from it essentially boils down to the fact that Star Wars is a simple good versus evil story written for kids. It's not that deep, but The Last Jedi is dark, realistic, and a whole lot deeper, so it is just better, and the fans who hate it are just not appreciating it. Star Wars is not that great, but The Last Jedi is. The author thinks they're being smart, but this is just arrogant asshole snobbery 101. It kind of bleeds over into the idea that media that's more simplistic and or aimed at kids or mass audiences is objectively less valuable or less worthy of respect. First and foremost, even simple stories take a creative vision and hard work to bring to life properly, and they can be executed very well, and they can be just as impactful on someone as a story that's more complex. I'll remind you all that we live in a world in which a cartoon from Nickelodeon is considered one of the greatest pieces of media of the last quarter of a century, and still has analysis videos coming out to this very day. And a preschool show about cartoon dogs is being watched, enjoyed, and even loved by adults who cry and buy merch of it. I'm not saying we should judge movies like A New Hope on the same metric as movies like Citizen Kane. I'm just saying they can both impact people in different ways, and that Star Wars and other simple stories wouldn't be able to impact their fans the way they do if they were as dark, realistic, or deep as other movies. And no, Martin Scorsese, you don't get to delegitimize Marvel movies because you find them too samey and too safe. Cinema is an incredibly broad term like any medium of art, and no one person gets to define it, no matter what accomplishments they've made in the medium of film, or how simple-minded they personally find the movies. If Martin Scorsese was just expressing disappointment and or dislike of the MCU, that would be perfectly fine. But his position as a recognized figure in the film industry doesn't give him the right to dictate what is or is not recognized as art. You can absolutely call something bad art, but you shouldn't call something not art. And that's coming from someone who fell out of love with the MCU years ago. Okay, with all that established, I can finally get to the most controversial part of this video. My honest thoughts on Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson has come under a lot of flack for his role in the sequel trilogy, most notably writing and directing The Last Jedi. I'm sure we've all seen the clips of him and Mark Hamill, in which Hamill tells him you should listen to the fans, and Rian Johnson just rejected him, saying, "No, we need to think about our movie." And Hamill buries his head in his hands. Basically, Rian Johnson is someone who does what he wants with his films, regardless of what people expect from him. And while I can respect that as an aspiring artist and storyteller, I cannot respect him for doing that in a franchise he did not create, in a trilogy he did not start. I also want to say I do think he's a good director. I personally really enjoyed Glass Onion. I'd give it at least an 8 out of 10. But I don't like the idea of him handling someone else's IP after seeing what he did to Star Wars. Knowingly doing something that goes against what the original creator wanted is, in my opinion, disrespectful to said original creator and the fanbase. A fanbase that you did not cultivate for a franchise you did not create. Yes, the thing you made might be good in its own way, and even develop a fanbase of its own, even out of the original fanbase, but it's still an act of disrespect. You can feel free to disagree with me in the comments on this one. This is just my opinion after all. And I know this is bringing up the concept of death of the author, which is a hotly debated topic after all, but I've got my reasons for why I have this attitude. If you spent a massive part of your life working on something until it became too big a burden for you to bear anymore, so you had to pass it on, wouldn't you want it to be treated with respect? I know Lucas didn't directly hire Rian Johnson, but still, wouldn't you at least want your life's work to be treated with respect for your original vision? As a point of comparison, I'm going to bring up two counterexamples. Both are cases in which the original creator worked on a beloved story and genre staple of their respective mediums, but had to leave the main story of the franchise to others to complete. The Wheel of Time, the book specifically this time, not the show, and Berserk. Starting with the former, since it's the one I'm most familiar with. The key point here is that the original author of the books died before he was able to complete the series, leaving the story to be completed by Brandon Sanderson, who wasn't the superstar author that he is now. Keep that in mind, it will be important later. But he was an accomplished author and a massive fan of Wheel of Time, which was why he was picked up by the original author's widow/editor, Harriet McDougal, to potentially finish the series. And while he did make his own choices with the last 3 books, he did everything he could to stick to Robert Jordan's original vision, and lo and behold, fans loved it. Not only that, but Harriet worked with him on some of his other projects. And it left the door open for a lot of Wheel of Time fans to move on and start reading his solo works, which is part of what brought him to where he is now, the biggest fantasy author without a major adaptation of his work. If Brando Sando had the same attitude as Rian Johnson, the end of Wheel of Time would not have been nearly as well received. A lot of fans would have hated it, and it would be a lot harder to recommend, knowing the original intended ending would never be written. Actually, that would never have happened because Harriet would have kicked him off the project as soon as she realized what he was doing. But that is not the world we live in, thankfully. Now, I don't know much about the continuation of Berserk, but I do know that the guy who picked it up, like Sanderson, is an accomplished artist in the same medium. And he was friends with Kentaro Miura, which is why he even heard the ending in the first place. He has also been adamant that he is only sticking with what was directly dictated to him by Kentaro Miura, and that seems to be working out well. In any case, if he approached finishing Berserk with the same attitude that Rian Johnson approached Star Wars, I guarantee you, the Berserk fanbase would not look the same as it does today. What further compounded my feelings on The Last Jedi and the sequel trilogy as a whole was when I came across two other examples of seeing a trilogy of massive stories being finished. Each entry in the trilogy had a largely different main cast with a different main plot, and the final entry in the trilogy was basically an epilogue for the greater story. Both of which were also stories I went through over the course of my life and only finished in my adulthood, and both of them I absolutely adore. They are The Trials of Apollo and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So The Trials of Apollo is something I've gushed about before on this channel, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I'll give you a quick rundown. The Trials of Apollo is the third in a trilogy of pentalogies of books that author Rick Riordan calls the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles, which consist of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the one most of you are familiar with by far, the Heroes of Olympus, and of course the Trials of Apollo. The base premise of the series is that the Greek gods are real and they often have children with mortals, called half-bloods or demigods. Half-bloods tend to lead troubled lives, since they are often targeted by monsters that still exist and are hidden from mortal eyes. The central figure here, the Luke Skywalker equivalent at least, is obviously Percy Jackson. And I'm not going to rehash his entire journey here. I've already done that in numerous other videos. But what's important to know for us today is that he was the protagonist of the original series. Even with all the other important characters, it was really his story. It was first-person narration told from his perspective. But when Heroes of Olympus rolled around, he wasn't the protagonist anymore. He was a main character, certainly, but it wasn't really his story anymore. And it was more about all the new characters, their journeys, and the greater story of the world. Hence why this series switches to third-person narration. And then it was time for Trials of Apollo. Yes, Apollo had been a part of the story up until that point, but he does go through a really compelling character arc. But aside from that, it also acted as an epilogue for most of the characters we had grown fond of throughout the previous two series. Each book gives 2 or 3 of them a chance to shine, including Percy, who finally got to retire from being the god's errand boy. I know there's the Senior Year Adventures trilogy that takes place before Trials of Apollo and stars Percy again, but he isn't saving the world this time, and the story is also about him letting go. No characters were outright assassinated or had their stories retroactively made pointless by amounting to nothing, aside from arguably 2 of them, but that sentiment isn't common in the fandom. And I overall just felt rewarded for going through it all. It was genuinely one of the most satisfying experiences I've ever had as a reader. Moving over to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which as the name implies, is the third in a trilogy of very long video games. All 3 of which star a plucky band of underdog heroes living in a massive world populated by gigantic beings called Titans. The heroes always embark on a journey to save their world from an as-of-yet unseen threat. Along the way, they help those in need, recruit others to their cause, and slowly discover how their world really works, and the dark forces that are really in control, along with revealing compelling themes about the cyclic nature of human conflict. Eventually, through struggle and sacrifice, the heroes win the day, and their worlds are free to live in peace. Xenoblade 3 is like this, but it also features members of the cast from the previous 2 games, and they spent the rest of their lives protecting people, doing what they've always done. While I could complain about how their decisions didn't lead to a permanent impact when that was what the end of the games implied, it did still clearly have a positive lasting effect that ultimately led their worlds in the right direction. And again, I felt very satisfied seeing everything culminate, and it was a very rewarding experience for me. And both of those experiences have shown me what Star Wars could have been if handled by people who understood it and wanted to do it justice. Instead of that, I feel cheated for sticking with the franchise as long as I did. And if that isn't a sign to just walk away, then I don't know what is. I may not possess any right to decide what to do with the franchise, but I have every right to just walk away and not give them my time and money if I no longer feel it's worth it to me. And that's why I can't respect anyone who just has their way with a franchise they did not create and probably don't even like. Fundamentally, they are handling something they did not create, something that does not really belong to them. And when you're handling something that does not belong to you, isn't it common courtesy to treat it with respect and don't do anything the original creator would not want you to do? So with all that said, what do we do about all this? I realized while writing the script for this video that this was ultimately a lesson in respect. Respect for other fans who may disagree with you for one reason or another, because we're all people with opinions on media and probably too much time on our hands, but also respect for creatives, and I mean this for the industry and the fans. Corporate executives don't really respect creativity, if how readily they've embraced AI didn't indicate this already. And this really ought to change. Fans, on the other hand, have a habit of taking it for granted and not really understanding what goes into it. I'm not sure how to fix these problems, but we should keep them in mind so if we ever get the opportunity to change the industry, we take it. Just remember, you are entitled to your opinion and where you decide to spend your time and money, but no one else's. And if something you're invested in is falling off, such as a movie series or TV show going on after its natural endpoint, or is getting worse and worse over time, you should consider turning away, no matter how much you're invested. Same sort of thing with being invested in an influencer or franchise creator. I don't know what that says about me, but I certainly wouldn't blame any of my fans for disengaging with my content if they weren't enjoying it anymore, and had no other reason to keep watching. Though, real talk, right now I could use the help. I lost my job several months ago, and did several things to try and get another job, but none of them worked. Despite the fact that a family member agreed to take care of my housing needs, my financial future is a little bit uncertain, so I could use the help. If you can't help me directly, you can always help just by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. All the things YouTubers tell you to do. They really do make a difference. I am Kylan Mythos, and I'll see you all next time. And hopefully, I never need to talk about The Last Jedi in a video like this ever again. Because I'm just tired of it at this point.